Hello, John Bloodworth, Gentleman Crafter here again with part 2 of my digitizing of this Namasté Mandala design. As I mentioned in the last video, I will be using Hatch Embroidery software. For more information on that, please head over to hatchembroidery.com. When I last left you, I had basically created the background and much of the detailed line work. What I'm now going to be doing is some of the borders along with the focal design of the Namasté symbol. Digitizing an open shape is very much similar to what I've been doing in the previous video, but this time I've set the stitch to be a satin stitch with a width of 1.5 millimeters, so that's quite fine. Don't often see satin stitch that thin, but I just thought that it would work well for this particular design. Just checking the in and out points of that, as I did with the previous video, and of course using my layout tools to replicate that section around the design. And this time I will choose yes to weld those together. What I did find though was that at some of the corners the satin stitch was quite spaced out, so I used the radial fill from the object properties to make it follow a different path. And that's something that you can do in this software to get either a different or a better result, so it's up to you. You can also just use basic shapes like circles, ovals, squares and rectangles, and they come out perfectly every time. So I've just added 2 lines of satin stitch in a matter of seconds, and now I want to go on and create the focal point in the middle, which is the Namasté symbol. I've chosen my stitch type to be a fill, a satin fill, and I've chosen my colour and the digitize closed shape tool from the digitize menu. And the first one is simple, 3 points, plot, 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 4 points, sorry, and then press enter to set that in place. For the next one there's a couple more points because obviously I need the curved edges that go around. Now with satin stitch it will break and sort of stitch at various points, so you will get dips and troughs. So I kind of came to the conclusion early on that I wanted to change it for a tatami stitch. That's easy, that's just literally a case of selecting the object and then clicking on the stitch type to change it. Don't have to replot it or anything like that. With this shape I wasn't sure whether to do it in several sections or as a whole when I was first designing this, but I thought if I'm going to be using the tatami fill as opposed to the digitize blocks tool, then I beg your pardon, if I was going to be using the closed shape tool instead of the digitize tool, then it wouldn't really matter if I did it as one shape or 3. If I'd have used the digitize blocks tool, I probably would have done it as 3 parts, and that way I would have had much more control over the direction of the stitching for each element of that particular part of this design. If you do fluff up, don't forget you can use the backspace. I have used that a couple of times, as you see me doing here, just to really backtrack along that stitch line. And then when you get to the end, same as before, you press enter to set that in place. And then you can make any adjustments you need to. There I was just checking the jumps from shape to shape to make sure that there'd be no huge trailing threads. And here I'm just adding the Florentine effect just to see if it will make a huge difference to the visual feel of the stitching. In the end, I think I chose to leave it off. But what I did decide to do was to create some outlines and offsets. Good to know that you can actually have both going on. Okay, so there we go, that's my design pretty much finished. So I click on save to save that, and then of course I would need to export it. But what I wanted to do was just go back in and make sure that all of the jumps and the sequences were going to stitch as I'd hoped, so that I wouldn't end up with lots of leftover trails or bits and pieces that I would have to trim and snip. Can also make a difference to whether your fabric puckers as to whether you work from the outside in or from the inside out. So I was just again double checking the sequence in the Objects tab, just to make sure that things would stitch in the right order and that the finished design would look tidy. Basically this sequence works top down, so the first thing in position 1 would be the first thing to stitch out, and then obviously the thing at the very end would be the last thing that stitches out. So it's fairly straightforward and common sense. And then of course the software has the built-in player, so I can even virtually stitch it out and check that it's going to sort of stitch in the right order that I've kind of set. Always fun to watch as well. Now just to point out, I have heavily sped this up. This isn't the 960 stitch a minute speed. This is sped up considerably. And of course you can do that with the slider at the top of the screen as well. So here comes the satin stitch on the borders. Yeah. So there we go. For the final design, just to let you know, I did actually change the order of stitching slightly, and I also changed up some of the colours for some funky threads. And then this was the final one that I decided on. Fabulous, isn't it? That's it for this time. If you've enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. And for more from me in the future, please remember to subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.